Resource optimization is getting the best results from your resources. And the two principal approaches are called resource leveling and resource smoothing. What's the difference? Resource optimization refers to any approach that we have to ensuring that we get the best value from the resources we have available in delivering our project. The term resources here can apply to any kind of resources, people, materials or assets. Although when we're talking about resource optimization and resource smoothing and resource leveling, we are most often applying it to people, to human resources. The two principal approaches to resource optimization are resource leveling and resource smoothing. However, rather like fast tracking and crashing, which I looked at in an earlier video, these two terms, resource leveling and resource smoothing, are often used interchangeably by many project managers. And the truth is, the differences are subtle, and to a first degree, it really doesn't matter. However, details can sometimes be important, so let's understand the distinction between resource leveling and resource smoothing. But before we do that, it is also important to state that project managers are adaptable and pragmatic if we're anything at all. And this means that often on our projects, what we actually do is a combination of both. We use both resource smoothing and resource leveling in our optimization, and that is right and proper. The approach that we take to resource optimization will usually depend on whether our project is resource limited or time limited. Resource limited means that you have a fixed availability of resources or budget to pay for them. You'd like to finish early, but resources are your critical constraint. In this case, the approach we take is resource leveling. When a project is time limited, it must be completed by a certain deadline. Sure, you'd like to minimize the use of your resources, but your constraint is the schedule. And if you need to, you may use additional resources to achieve this. In this case, the approach you take is resource smoothing. Between these two extremes, of course, we can make compromises in our planning. We look for ways to speed up our project with more resources, and we look for ways to use our resources more frugally by allowing our project to take a little bit longer in certain places. Resource leveling. In resource leveling, we are prepared to delay activities so that we can use our resources with a more even profile, fewer peaks and troughs in the requirement for resources. This creates less variation in our use of resources and can have two very useful consequences. Firstly, it can mean that we need fewer resources to get the work done. And secondly, it can reduce the risk of non-availability of critical resources, either due to other requirements on those resources, or if those resources are not available for reasons of things like illness or domestic problems. Resource leveling is therefore ideal when there are constraints or restrictions on the availability of resources. By using resource leveling, we can increase our confidence that the resources will be available when we need them. Because we can allow ourselves to adjust the start and end dates of activities to delay the use of those resources, we can find that resource leveling leads to changes in the project timeline. It can affect the critical path and therefore cause the final endpoint of the project to be moved back, which means that resource leveling is not appropriate if we have a fixed deadline to work to. The best simple definition of resource leveling that I could find is PMIs. PMI defines resource leveling as a resource optimization technique in which adjustments are made to the project schedule to optimize the allocation of resources. Resource smoothing In resource smoothing, we move activities, but only within the constraints of the existing available float, or slack. And if you're not fully familiar with the term float, or slack, its other name, then we have a video that answers the question, what is float? And I'll put a link to it in the description. PMI defines resource smoothing as a resource optimization technique in which free and total float are used without affecting the critical path. However, there is also an alternative approach to resource smoothing. In this case, we can either increase or reduce the number of resources applied to any given task. This allows us to do two things. Firstly, it allows us to smooth out the peaks and troughs in resource requirement. But secondly, it allows us to add or reduce resources and ensure that the tasks are all finished by the original deadline. So, in simple terms, the approach you take to resource optimization will depend on what you want, on what matters most to you, whether it's resource minimization or meeting your deadline. When you care most about minimizing your use of resources and are prepared to accept as a compromise a shift in your deadline, then you will move tasks around and do resource leveling. However, if what matters most to you is hitting that deadline and you're prepared as a compromise to accept additional resource costs, then you'll use resource smoothing to add resources but only shift activities within available float. And of course, when you are a pragmatist trying to balance the conflicting pressures of schedule and budget, then you will do a little bit of both. Please do give this video a like if you've enjoyed it or learned from it. I'll be making loads more great project management videos for you, so please do subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of them. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.